You know, this month, August, is coffee month. I don't know if you knew that or not, but it's pretty appropriate that the guy we've got as our speaker today, a fellow by the name of Rich Lipner, he lives most of the year in Panama, where he owns and operates a small coffee farm, but he also has an apartment in Evanston, and he visits there periodically throughout the year, and that's why we're able to get him. He also, at one point, was president of Meals on Wheels here. And I think you're going to find this is a very interesting talk, because he's going to talk about the growing and the processing and the marketing of coffee, or merchandising of coffee. And I'm not going to say much else, because I'm going to let him talk for himself. Rich, welcome.
Thank you, Jay.
Okay.
Good morning. What a pleasure it is to be here with you guys, men and women, today. You know, I can do this talk several different ways, but the one I think I want to approach it is I'd like to know what you are interested in. I can talk about economics of coffee, ethics of coffee, marketing of coffee, growing of coffee, brewing, roasting, all the different aspects of coffee. I'll give you a little bit of a background on myself. Jay mentioned I'd been the director of the Meals on Wheels program in San Francisco for 20 years. I actually ran a senior center, not quite as nice as this one, I got to say, but I have a background working with older adults. In 2002, my wife and I went to Panama to visit a Panamanian friend, and it changed our lives. We had always planned to retire outside of the States, but we hadn't planned on going to Panama. My wife went to university in Italy, and we thought we were going to retire in Italy. And if you guys remember, in 2002, the dollar was pretty strong against the euro. It was almost feasible. We had our first encounter in Boquete, Panama, and it was the friendliest place I'd ever been. I felt like I couldn't walk down the street in the village without somebody wanting to practice their English with me. And 3 times in a 10-day visit, I was invited into the homes of people I'd met on the street to have coffee, and I was just blown away. On the airplane back to San Francisco, and the light bulb goes off. There's nobody in Lake Como waiting for a couple of gringos to become their neighbors. Maybe we ought to come back and take a look at Panama. And we did. We came back 3 months later, not with the idea or the intention of buying a coffee farm, okay? I'm a city boy. I had not been a farmer. We looked at property for 1.5 days. At the end of the second day, they asked us if we'd like to see an abandoned coffee farm. We said, sure, why not? They drove us up the hill. We saw the property on a Thursday afternoon and purchased it the next morning. We made an impulse buy. But the real story, and the story that I like to talk about in coffee, is this. My farm hadn't been farmed in 5 years when we purchased it. That was the case with nearly 40% of the coffee farms throughout Central America. Okay. Coffee is a very difficult business. It's a broken business, a broken industry. When you look at it, it's huge. It's a $100 billion a year industry. But when you look at the realities of what's happening, almost all of the money stays at the point of consumption, and very little comes back down to origin, to the farmers. We could talk about any commodity, and we'd have that same result, but you got me, you're talking about coffee a little bit today. Let me stop and ask, how many, just by show of hands, does everybody drink coffee? Do you drink coffee on a daily basis? How many Starbucks consumers here? Okay, I'm going to be kind with Starbucks. Anybody in the coffee business here? Okay, so when you buy a Starbucks coffee, you're paying what, $3, $4 for a cup of coffee? When you buy coffee in the supermarkets, what are you paying, $8, $10, $12 for a pound of coffee? I mean, just kind of in that ballpark? Okay, yeah, okay. So the coffee farmers right now, today, in Central America, The two ways to be in the coffee business. One is to be a quantity seller, which is about 70% of the farmers all over the coffee world. Quantity sellers, okay? They just grow coffee and they sell it. They grow cherries. Everything in coffee starts as a cherry on a tree, okay? And they just grow cherries and they sell them, okay? It's the worst way to be in business, but because there's little infrastructure in the areas where coffee is grown, that's what the majority of the coffee farmers do. Much, much, much more profitable to export coffee. And I'll talk about that a little bit. That's where the money is, but unless you're a sophisticated farmer, you're not going to be able to do it. And the reality is, decisions in the coffee world are made by very sophisticated multinational corporations. Major stakeholders in the coffee industry are third, fifth, seventh generation farmers doing with very little education, very little sophistication, and doing what they and their families have always done. It's a broken industry, okay? There needs to be some compensation, some balance in it. Coffee, when you saw it as a commodity, is traded on two commodities markets. The C price of coffee fluctuates between $1.18 per pound and maybe $1.25 per pound. The cost to grow coffee costs someplace between $1.35 per pound and $1.55 per pound. So you're in a deficit position as a coffee grower if you're the normal coffee grower. Over 25 million coffee farms worldwide, okay? An industry made up of very, very unsophisticated stakeholders and doing, very struggling in the coffee world, you know. Coffee's grown in a band of 20 degrees on either side of the equator at elevations of 3,000 to 7,500 feet. And so if you were to look at a globe, you'd see Central America, parts of South America, Indonesia, and parts of Africa. And that's the belt where coffee is grown. If you look at those countries, there are 73 coffee growing nations. At a point not too long ago, 71 were identified as developing nations, third world nations, okay? Countries without a lot of infrastructure, without a lot of funding, without a lot of education, and that's where coffee is grown. But you go into a Starbucks and you pay $3 or $4 or $5 for a cup of coffee, something should be changing. I mean, that's at least from my perspective, something should be changing, okay? We have a major workforce, 55 million coffee workers in the world, not baristas in shops, field workers, farm workers, okay? I live in Panama. Panama has the strongest economy in Central America. We have a minimum wage of $12 a day, not an hour, $12 a day for a coffee worker, okay? The reality is most of the farms are paying between $8 and $10 a day. They're not even paying the $12 minimum wage. When you go further into Central America, Guatemala, Nicaragua, Honduras, Mexico, El Salvador, people are making $4 or $5 a day. I spent a month in Rwanda, in Africa, genocide-torn Rwanda. Only industry in a country of 22 million people is coffee. There they make $1 a day, okay? You can go into a Starbucks and pay $6 for a Rwandan coffee. The guy who makes it, who works it, is making $1 a day. So when I say the industry needs to change, this is what I'm talking about, really. We need to have some kind of balance coming back into the industry. So let me not complain too much. I'm sorry. You got me on a passionate point here, or I got myself on a passionate point. Let me tell you a little bit about coffee and how it works. And my farm, okay. I have a small farm. We are 3 hectares, so just a little bit over 7 acres, okay. Larger than the average size farm worldwide by quite a bit. Larger than the average size farm in Central America also. On a good year, we'll produce 10,000 pounds of coffee, okay. We have 8,000 coffee trees on our farm, and last year we collected 13 million cherries. This is where it starts, as a cherry on a tree. What you need from the cherries are the seeds, okay? So each cherry will have 2 seeds. Each seed will have a layer of parchment around it, the way peanuts have parchment. And then the mucilage, the fruit. And then if it's picked properly, a small amount of very sweet juice, and then the red skins, okay? This is where it starts. You need to get rid of these layers, and you need to dry them. When they're picked properly, they're 55% in moisture content. And in order to roast the coffee, you have to get rid of these layers and bring the moisture content down to under 12%. It's called processing of coffee. And processing of coffee, too, like a lot of other things in the industry, just goes forward without much regard for what impact it's having on the areas where the coffee is being processed. What I'm speaking of specifically is ecosystems. You mentioned, Jay, you've got somebody coming in talking about climate change in a few weeks. It's real, and we're seeing it, and my industry is contributing to it, okay? 80% of the coffee in the world is processed in what's called the washed method. And the washed method uses about 1/2 gallon of water for every cup of coffee consumed. Over 2 billion cups of coffee are consumed daily worldwide. We're talking about 90 billion gallons of water a day, okay? A lot of issues with this water. The one that I see most tangibly where I live is we don't have fish or plants in our streams or rivers because of processing coffee, okay? What they do is they scrape the fruit off of the seed, and then they use so much water they have to do something with the water, and they put it back into our streams and rivers. So nutrient-rich water going into a stream or a river grows algae. Algae takes the oxygen out of the water, it kills the fish, kills the plant life. Actually, it produces methane, which is a climate changer. So we're kind of going a long way not toward in our best interests, okay? Alternative method done in the African countries, primarily called the natural method, where you don't use the water. If you're ecology minded and you're going into specialty shops, ask for naturals. Don't ask for washed method. Okay. Okay, I've talked. What do you guys want to hear about? I don't want to just talk to you. I don't do these where I'm the only speaker. I want to know what you're interested in here. Yes, sir.
The distribution system of the money and how
Oh. Perfect question. I love it. Okay. So, in my community, okay, I live in Boquete, Panama. We have the most expensive coffee in the world grown and sold there, okay? In the coffee world, there are multiple species of coffee, only two consumable, Robusta and Arabica, okay? Robusta is grown at low elevations. It's a big, strong, hardy tree, and they can machine harvest it like this, okay? Arabica is the opposite, high elevation, fragile trees, everything done by hand. Robusta is produced at about 50% of the cost of Arabica, and if you're gracious, it has about 50% of the flavors of Arabica. Okay, so Robusta is used as an extender of coffees. When you buy a Folgers or a Maxwell House or Hills Brothers, if it says 100% Arabica, it definitely will be. But if it doesn't, believe me, it's going to be a blend because they can produce it at half the price and they put it in there. Okay, what's grown in Central America for the most part is Arabica. When you get into the Arabica species, over 3,000 varieties. And each variety does something a little bit different to the coffee. It might be a different aroma or flavor. It might be body or acidity. It might be brightness. It might be, if you're a farmer, you're concerned with numbers, so you might want to get a variety because it's more prolific, or you might get one because it's more disease resistant, okay? So the farmer has to make up their minds what they want to be, what business they're in, and they also have to know what their growing conditions are. This is a long way to get to the answer for your question, but I'll get there, I promise you, okay? Growing conditions are very important for a coffee farmer. And what we mean is altitude, microclimate, and soil. Those three things should dictate to the farmer what he or she is going to plant, okay? It's not such a profound thought, but not one that's often implemented in coffee, is that different varieties will grow better in different combinations of these variables. In the wine world, you'd never plant a Malbec grape, a Riesling grape, and a Cabernet grape in the same field. In the coffee fields in the world, they were planting whatever they had wherever they were. It's like they took a handful of seeds from each bag, threw it up in the air, and wherever it landed is where it landed, okay? So, only in the last 25 years has the industry started to understand that they can produce better coffees by understanding their growing conditions. All right. We have, in all the Central American countries, they have a competition at the end of every year, every harvest year, and that's harvests generally take place between December and April. So in May or June, they have a competition, best of Panama, best of Honduras, best of Costa Rica, whatever it might be. And we had a coffee that sold this past June for $803 per pound, okay? This is a lot of money for a pound of coffee, okay? They actually sold 100 pounds of this at $803 per pound. But most of the farmers don't do it that way. Most of the farmers are quantity sellers. They grow cherries, okay? And they sell their cherries. And coffee's a global commodity. It's based on global supply and demand. It's not based on quality when you're a quantity seller. It's not based on local conditions, global supply and demand. Demand for coffee not at risk. I read a lot of the Starbucks blogs, and I'm an anti-Starbucks guy. I don't want to be too prejudiced here. A lot of good things about Starbucks, but a lot of bad things as well. But I read a lot of their literature, okay? Starbucks talks about Asia as the fastest growing coffee consuming area in the world ever, even faster than North America, okay? And their example is that at the end of 2015, they had 2,000 stores operating in China. At the end of 2018, they'll have 3,800 stores operating in China. That's a store opening every 15 hours. It's unbelievable, okay? And India and South Korea are right behind them. I spent a month in India last year, and every village of over 25,000 people had a coffee shop in there. I thought it was all tea. It's coffee. So demand's not at risk, okay? Supply is the variable, and Brazil is the driver. Brazil produces 40% of the world's coffee in most years. If Brazil has a normal or above normal harvest, coffee prices in the rest of the world will be flat. That's been the case for the last 9 years. Where I live, the unit of measure is the lata. Lata means can in Spanish, okay? And the way this came about was when coffee pickers were picking cherries off of the trees, they would wear a 5-gallon kerosene can around their waist. They pick the cherries individually, one by one, they fill up the can. They get paid by how many of these cans they pick, and then the seller, the grower, gets paid by how many of these cans they sell, okay? So that price varies from year to year based on global supply and demand. This past year, it was $7.50 per latte. In one latte of cherries, you end up with 5 pounds of coffee, okay? So if I were to sell cherries, I'd be getting $7.50 for 5 pounds. I pay my pickers $3 per latte to pick the coffee. So in fact, I'd be getting a net of $4.50 for 5 pounds of coffee. That's 90 cents a pound. I have 10,000 pounds on a good year. That's $9,000 a year. I can't operate a farm on $9,000 a year. Nobody can operate a farm on $9,000 a year. Much, much better to be in the export business, okay? The problem with export in countries where coffee is grown is there has to be an infrastructure to support the uneducated farmer, okay? I don't want to sound like an elitist, but I'm a realist. I see what's going on there. I can see, if you don't speak English, you're going to have a bigger problem than if you do speak English. Most people don't speak English in my country. If you don't have a computer, you're going to have a really big problem. I shouldn't say hardly anybody has computers, but the vast majority of the farmers don't have computers, okay? And the real obstacle to exporting coffee is cash flow. When you export your coffee, okay, you have to wait for your money, all right? So your major expenses in coffee are paying the pickers during the harvest season. 60% of the coffee expenses take place in the 4 months between December and April. When I export coffee, I rarely get my money before November, okay? Which means I can withstand the cash flow. I can do that, of course I can, but my neighbors can't. They have hungry children. They got to put food on the table today. They can't wait for 4 or 5 or 6 months. And so by default, they're selling coffee as a quantity, okay? I'll tell you our history and then I'll stop. First 3 years I owned the farm, and remember, I had absolutely no knowledge of farming. I didn't know what I was doing. I made an impulse buy. I feel today like the luckiest man that ever lived, and we've been very, very, very fortunate, okay? But we are very much the exception to the rule. First 3 years we had the farm, we sold cherries like everybody else, and we lost a lot of money, okay? Finally, my wife said, hey, you better do something, or you're gonna have to sell the farm. And so I said, okay, well, I'll try to export coffee. So I did, okay? The challenge to export coffee, besides waiting for the money, is coffee travels unroasted in a 40,000-pound container on an ocean-going vessel, okay? So if I'm coming to Chicago, or I'm going to Singapore, or I'm going to Hamburg, I've got to find a container that's leaving Panama that has room on it that will allow me to consolidate, okay, and that will get me to my destination, and that's hard, okay? So I did something my neighbors can't do. I did a Google search, okay? Well, I found out that more coffee from Panama goes to Rotterdam in the Netherlands than any other location, and Seattle, Washington in the States. So I send samples to these two locations. I get lots of buyers. I get onto a ship going to Seattle, and I sell, this is 2006, I sell 3,000 pounds of coffee to a roaster in Seattle. If I had sold the coffee as a cherry, it would have been 60 cents per pound. As an unroasted bean, it was $3 per pound. Okay, 5 times more, still losing money, but not so much. I'm pretty good with this decision, okay? They have the coffee in their shops for a little over a month, and they call me and they said, Rich, do you have any more coffee? I said, no, why? They said, well, we sold out of your coffee. I said, oh my God, that's great. People like my coffee. I'd never sold coffee before. As an afterthought in the conversation, I said, how much did you sell the coffee for? He said, $20 a pound. I said, really? You bought it for 3 and sold it for 20. I'm still losing money. I'm on the wrong side of this business, okay? And so we made a couple of decisions, okay? One, we said, I'll never export coffee again, ever, but you should never say never because I do it again, okay? But we decided to keep our coffee in country, okay? I felt like Panama is like almost every origin country in the world. It's very difficult to find a good cup of coffee. All the best coffee goes out for export, okay? And so you're often stuck with the instants or the low-grade coffees because the coffee cultures haven't evolved the way they have in North America and Europe and in Asia too now. So I said I can compete with the best coffees here, all right? And we said, we'll just keep our coffee in country. I bought a coffee roasting machine. My wife designed a label, and now I'm in business here. I also got talked into doing coffee tours, something I never, ever anticipated I would like doing, or that people would want to come and visit my farm and listen to me yap for. I was blown, turns out I like both of these things, okay? It worked for us, and they came together in a way that was unimaginable. Just remember, I had no business plan. I was responding, I was acting to something I thought was unjust, okay? First month of tours, at the end of a tour, a young woman comes up, Panamanian woman comes up to me, she says, can I speak to you? I said, sure. She said, you know, I've been on every coffee tour in Boquete, and nobody's ever talked to us about wages and living conditions for farm workers, and I'm appalled. This is terrible, and I want to do something about it. And I said, great, but I didn't think much more about it, okay? About 10 days later, a guy comes up and said, I work with Maria Rosa, this is the woman's name, and she told me about what you were telling on this tour, and we want to buy your coffee, and I'm the general manager of the Marriott Hotel in Panama City. We'd like to sell your coffee, okay? This is my first customer, all right? For a guy without a business plan, this is a very good customer to have, okay? And we've been very fortunate from there. We've been selling coffee in hotels and restaurants in Panama, Panama City, in the community that we live in Boquete. We do a small online business here in the States. And by the 2010, we're selling out of everything we can produce, okay? 2011, I get a series of emails from a coffee roaster in Germany, in Dusseldorf, and the guy says, I'm coming to Boquete and I'd like to buy your coffee. And I said, I don't sell coffee for export, but I've got a lot of colleagues here who would be thrilled to be your producer. Let me know, when you're going to be here and what you're looking for. My quality of coffee, higher quality of coffee, cheaper coffee. Just let us know what you want, and we'll find somebody. They'd be thrilled to be your grower. Guy goes back and forth for about a month with emails. Finally, he says, all right, I'll let you know. 12 hours after I get that email, he calls and says, I'm here in Boquete. Can I come and see your farm? And I said, no, I haven't done anything. Why would, Well, I kind of caved, and I brought him up to my farm, and I'm really glad I did, okay? He gets to the farm, it's pouring rain, and the first thing he does when he gets there is he said, is it okay if I go and speak with your farm workers? I said, sure. And he goes and finds a guy that works for me. He asks to see the guy's house, okay? Well, the guy lives in a nice house, and I don't think I'm patting myself on the back. I'm saying that culturally, when you're a farm owner and you come from North America, I come from a background of nonprofit, I mean, you're not going to become a slave owner. You're going to try and do the right thing with your workers, okay? And so he has a nice house. He looks at the house, okay? And then the guy comes back down and says, Rich, why don't you want to sell me any coffee? And I said, well, you're going to offer me $3.50, maybe $4 a pound for the coffee. That's what the market value of the coffee is, okay? And I sell it here on my farm for $10 a pound, and I sell out of it every year. And he said, okay, I get that. How much coffee do you have left? I had 6,000 pounds of coffee left. He said, I'll buy all of your coffee for $10 a pound, okay? This is an extraordinary offer. This didn't make any sense. 5 years later, worldwide, Starbucks is paying $1.95 per pound. This guy's offering me $10 a pound for coffee he hadn't tasted. And I was shocked. I said, why would you do this? And his answer really is the crux or the foundation for my position in the coffee industry. What he said is this: look, if I buy your coffee for $4 a pound or $10 a pound, there's a $6 difference, okay? Every pound of coffee I buy from you, I take to my shops. He had 20 shops in Cologne and Dusseldorf. I sell it by the cup. I get 30 cups per pound. I get €3 per cup. I'm generating €90 in revenue. The difference of $6 out of €90 is measurable but insignificant. But for you, the difference of $6 out of $10 is a difference of whether you can give a guy a house with a roof and running water, whether you can pay him more than $10 a day, and really whether you'll be in business again next year or not. So while I didn't sell all of my coffee, we did make what we call a direct trade partnership, and for a coffee grower, that's the most advantageous relationship you can have. So, yes?
When we were in South America, I think it was in Brazil, I'm not sure, but we went to a coffee house, and it was an auction house. Mm-hmm. When they auction it, does your coffee get auctioned?
It can be, yeah. It definitely can be auctioned. And what happens, again, in each country a little bit different, and particularly Brazil because they're so much bigger. Panama is a tiny coffee producing country, but at the end of these competitions, the purpose of the competitions that they have every year is that they have judges come into the competition, okay? Who are the judges? They're the buyers of coffee, okay? They might be a Starbucks buyer, they might be a Maxwell House buyer, but they're more likely going to be like Pete's and Metropolitan and your local roasters, those kind of people, okay? They come in. At the competition, they can taste maybe 100 different coffees at one time, okay? If you've ever gone to coffee farms, you know, it's exciting the first time when you're in a 12-hour ride up to a coffee farm, but after the first time, it's not so exciting. Believe me, it's better to be able to taste 100 coffees in one sitting than it is to do 100 separate sittings or trying to get to the coffees. So for the buyer, it's to their advantage. They can taste a lot of coffees, and then they auction them off. For the seller, it's to my advantage because I could get 12 potential buyers to taste my coffee at one time instead of trying to invite them. That's the purpose of in Panama, that's the purpose of the auctions, okay? At the end of the competition, coffee is auctioned off. Brazil, I suspect, is a little bit different.
From the life story portion, when you and your wife bought the farm, you signed up on the bottom line, and the next day or whenever the day you took possession, what was your farm like? Was the roof off the house?
Okay.
Were the weeds in the...
It was jungle-like. So I'm from Northern California, and it reminded me of Sonoma and Napa counties in the 60s, where the wine, this is really the truth, where the wineries in those days were struggling Italian farmers, okay? That's who was in Sonoma County. And they were overgrown, and they were fighting, and they were talking about, oh my God, all the competition. But and I could never afford to buy winery property in California. Here, the property was, and we had no idea why it was so priced the way it was, okay? In those days, Panama and all of Central America was very, very affordable. So what we took was a farm that hadn't been farmed in 5 years. They had cleared it once probably, but it was still pretty jungle-like. There were no buildings. The first building that we built was housing for the worker, okay? Then we built a small house for us, and then we took over what had once been a structure, and we rebuilt it and made it into like a visitor's center, but that wasn't until 10 years later. Very different community in those days, though. Yes.
To many of us, and particularly me, South America is somewhat of a blur in that we maybe don't differentiate one nation from another. Mm-hmm. And you hear of the kind of problems that some of them are having coming up. Is it fair to ask you to give us a thumbnail of the Panamanians?
Sure. You'll get my old hippie answers, but yeah. Okay. Panama's had a major connection to the United States because of the canal. Okay, I mean, stability in Panama is pretty strong, all right? And there's still a special relationship between Panama and the United States. When you move up to Nicaragua, different form of government. Nicaragua is the problem area right now. When you move down to Colombia, Colombia just elected, actually, Colombia's South America, but they just elected a conservative president. Very interesting country, a country that everybody's afraid of and shouldn't be, by the way. Colombia is an amazing place to visit, very affordable, very educated, very sophisticated country. Costa Rica, which is our neighbor, is a major destination for North American tourists. Wonderful country. Of all those countries, Costa Rica has the best environmental policies. They don't allow what happens in Panama in the coffee industry to happen in Costa Rica, and I appreciate that about them. But the Central American countries are amazing. Guatemala, again. What I would say with all the countries, the capital cities, you have to fly into them, but they're usually not that interesting. But when you get out a little bit from the capital city, that's where the people live and where you see a lot of the real true beauty. So, yes.
Yeah. Basically, what are the differences between Panamanian,
I knew you were gonna-
Colombian, Hawaiian, and maybe other coffees?
Marketing. Okay. You guys know Juan Valdez, right? Juan Valdez, the most successful advertising campaign in the history of advertising. This is true. There's a book about it. 1950s, the Colombian Coffee Growers Association was struggling in the 50s, and they said, what are we going to do to market our coffee? And they said, well, we're going to go get a U.S. advertising firm, and they brought you Juan Valdez, okay? And they still bring you Juan Valdez. Juan Valdez actually now has shops all over the Americas, like Starbucks. They look like Starbucks. This is a fictional character, a guy who rode a donkey with a thing on his thing. It's marketing. The difference is, though, and the thing about coffee, again, I'll go back to these growing conditions. It's all about altitude and microclimate. You'll also see, okay, and when you talk about soil, we're talking about the richness of the soil. And so there's a pretty strong correlation between volcanic soil and high-end coffees, high-valued coffees, okay? It's because of the richness of the soil. So you can look and you'll see. We're built around, our community is built around a volcano, and an 11,000-foot volcano. And so there is that kind of nutrient soil. And the thing, too, let's just quickly on it, because I think it's it. I don't know if it's really interesting. This coffee, the variety of coffee called Geisha or Geisha, this is the $800 a pound coffee, okay? In order to get, anybody can grow it. I grow it, okay, but I don't have the right growing conditions. You have to be at altitudes of 5,800 feet or higher. You have to get 250 inches of rain or more, and you have to plant your coffee on a very steep eastern-facing slope, okay? You need those three conditions to grow this quality coffee. I have none of those conditions. I got tired of people asking me if I had it. I said, I'll buy 200 trees, and of course I have it, but it's not as good. It's not. We're at 4,600 feet, and we don't have that eastern-facing slope. So it's really the growing conditions that make the difference. So it could be in Colombia, it could be in Panama, it could be in Kenya or in Nairobi, any place in the world. It's just having that right combination. And marketing. It's really about marketing.
Along the same lines, we were in a Guatemala farm, and the manager said the best coffee is Rhodesia, then Guatemala, and then Costa Rica. Could you comment?
Yeah. The best coffee in the world is the one you like the best. Okay. There's no question in my mind about this. Wherever you go, no, look, wherever you go, they're going to tell you theirs is the best in the world. That's not true. The one you like the best is the best. Coffee's a really personal thing. I've done this. I've gone, let's say, there's an evaluation system in coffee. It exists. It's global, worldwide. They all do it the same way. It's like becoming a sommelier. You got to take the same kind of coursework and stuff. I've gone up that ladder. I've come back down that ladder. I don't believe that. I think the best coffee is the one that you like. If you like milk and sugar in your coffee, you should drink it that way.
Speaking
Yes.
of growing conditions, you rotate your crops or heavily fertilize them?
We fertilize, heavily fertilize. We're an organic farm. We have not put chemicals on. Well, it was 2013, an airborne fungus devastated the coffee growing world all over the world, and we used a copper-based fungicide then, but we haven't had any chemicals on it since then. Heavily fertilized. We start off with aged chicken manure and add back, do soils analysis and add back what's missing. Yes?
Can you just describe the distinction for fair trade coffee?
Yeah.
What makes that?
Okay. Okay, that's a complicated question, but I'm going to tell you. Let me start off by saying I would very much encourage you to support fair trade coffee, okay? Fair trade anything, whether it's coffee, cacao, bananas, whatever it is, okay? The idea there is to get some of the money back into the hands of the grower, who in turn gives it into the hands of the worker, okay? What fair trade is it's a contract that sets a minimum price at which the price can go no lower. It doesn't matter what the C price, the commodities price for the coffee is. So, for instance, if you have a fair trade contract for $1.80 per pound from Starbucks or Dunkin' or any of the big guys, okay, they can't pay you less than $1.80 per pound, even though the C price is $1.18 per pound. So it's a good thing. The issues with it, right now, in the last 18 months, there have been a lot of studies about implementation and effectiveness, okay? Fair trade almost always works with cooperatives, all right? When I was in Africa, the guys that I talked to, the farmers that I saw there, they all said the best job in Africa, in Rwanda, is to be the president of the co-op, because that's where the money is, okay? So you have to make sure that the money's actually being used the way it's supposed to, but that shouldn't preclude you or stop you from purchasing fair trade coffee, because it really doesn't cost you very much more money. I mean, it really doesn't when you think about it, and some of it's going to do some good. So. Yes?
Most of the small growers
Harold,
No.
just a minute.
No. It depends on, the question was, are most of the small growers organized into co-ops? In our country, no. There are, Panama's got a small, remember, there are 25 million coffee farms worldwide, okay? This is a lot of coffee farms. Panama only has about 1,000 farms. And it's my theory is that the macho society doesn't want to work together, okay? And so they're not. They don't. It makes no sense at all, because there are definite advantages to marketing together. I mean, that's where the advantage is marketing. You know, don't accept a lower price, but people continue to accept lower prices. So, yes. You know, I've been very lucky. I'm going to tell you. Here's the way I would describe it. I've been asked this question before. I retired. I was 62 when I retired. The first 6 months of retirement, I was bored. I didn't know what to do with myself. Finally, my wife said, "Hey, you bought a coffee farm. Maybe you ought to learn something about it." And it's like a coffee bug bit me and took over my life. So there's lots. I've had a lot of really, really wonderful mentors. The people I work with, people who I mean, the whole coffee work staff is indigenous, okay? And that's another thing I didn't address, but all over the world, you know, the lowest paid workforce any place in the world. But they've worked coffee all their lives. They know what's happening. That's what I've learned the most from, really. And a lot of stuff, a lot of print and electronic stuff.
Do you have any idea how much of the coffee market is now being sold in like K-cups?
I read that. It's increasing pretty significantly. I don't have the answer, the number on it, but it's increasing significantly. And there's some issues with that I think, at least again, you're hearing the old hippie in me come out, say, to address. Some of the K-cups and the reusables are very, very good. Some of the things the Nespresso stuff puts out that if you don't recycle it, you're contributing a lot of garbage to the world, okay? So, I don't know, I think Costco's got recyclable stuff. I think, I'll just make a plug. I don't do plugs very often. The people who produce the coffee for Costco's in North America, they stand out as good guys in an industry full of bad guys, okay? They are ethical. They go into the areas, they buy coffee all over the world. They go into these areas, they build infrastructure, water systems, healthcare facilities, educational facilities, all the things that are lacking, okay? So they're not just taking coffee and money out, they're putting something back in, so.
Yeah, you have a really good business sense. What did you do before you retired?
I was the director of the Meals on Wheels program in San Francisco for 20 years. So when you have that job, though, you're a fundraiser, basically. The government doesn't give you any money. You don't charge the clients, so you got to get the money someplace. So you work with foundations and corporations and wealthy individuals.
Why is dark coffee considered healthier than light or mild coffee?
I don't know that it is. The only thing that can be, I'm not sure that it is. What we would say is that it has a little bit less caffeine, okay, and than light roasted coffees, okay. Light, medium, and dark roasted coffees, okay. I'll talk quickly about it. 7,000 chemical reactions take place in the roasting machine, all right? And you taste more in a light roast. You've got a big flavor wheel like this. You might not like what you taste, but you taste more. When you go up, when you're talking about roasting, you're talking about caramelization. That's why the colors change, it's the caramelization. The flavor wheel diminishes, okay? And that can be a good thing or a bad thing. When you go up to here in a dark roast, things are much less distinguishable, much more familiar, okay? You're talking about a 5% difference in caffeine from a light roast to a dark roast. But I'm not sure that there are any other health benefits to dark roast. I don't know.
I have a question about caffeine. I'm one of those people who consume coffee after 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and I can dance on the ceiling all night long. Is there any way of producing a coffee bean with less caffeine? We do so much with genetics and experimentation and scientific stuff.
Yeah.
Are any coffees less caffeinated, and what happens to coffee to take the caffeine out?
Okay.
How invasive is it?
Well, let me start. Well, here's the first and best advice I can give you. Buy high-altitude coffee rather than low-altitude coffee. Okay, why? The caffeine is produced by the coffee tree or the tea tree to protect itself against insects, okay? Higher altitudes, colder weather, fewer insects. Conversely, lower altitude, hotter weather, more insects, more caffeine. So when you're looking at your coffees, you might have to go into your specialty coffee shops and say, hey, what's the altitude? You're not going to see it on a Folgers package, okay? That's number one. In terms of decaffeinating coffee, it sounds worse than the realities. They take the unroasted bean and they put it in a solution of water and a chemical which is a derivative of formaldehyde. It's a preservative. And when they take the unroasted bean out of this liquid solution and it dries out, the chemical extracts the caffeine with it. There's something called the Swiss water method decaffeination, which is done in Canada, not in Switzerland. That's the one to do if you can find it. They're proprietary with what they use, but they say it's not a chemical. They say it's an organic substance. So that's what I would be looking for. But I'd try the high altitude coffees also, see if that has a different impact on you.
When you're here and you're living in Evanston and you go out to dinner, do you go out to dinner at a restaurant where you say, they really got a great cup of coffee. I know I judge a restaurant a lot by that cup of coffee at the end. What do you do?
You know, that's a good question. I'm pretty much, there's a lot of the social and environmental impact of how you feel that at that moment when you get that cup of coffee, okay? I went to Walker Brothers yesterday for pancakes, and I didn't like the coffee, but I'd been there a million times where I thought the coffee was great, so I don't know. But I think it has a little bit to do with how you feel about it. When I'm really trying to taste coffees, I probably go with that in mind just for coffee, not for anything else, you know.
Can you tell us a little bit about the Panamanian work ethic? And a question with respect to, is there any pressure on farmers to grow something other than coffee that might create greater profits?
That's a good question. Panamanian work ethic. The Panamanians call themselves the happiest people in the world, and I kind of believe that in a way. When Panama went to the World Cup for the first time this year in the football games, and the qualifying match was over at 11:30 at night. At midnight, the president called a national holiday for the next day, okay, to celebrate. So it was amazing. Work ethic is interesting. I'd say that it's not it's not comparable to North American work ethic. It's not even comparable to Colombian work ethic. If you've got the workers don't get paid a lot. Okay, you remember they don't get paid a lot, but they're pretty sensitive and they'll walk off of a job pretty readily. Okay. What was the second part of your question? Oh, alternate crops. Yeah. Okay. What's happening? Okay, and that's a really good question. Okay, what's happening is that, like on the hill that I live on, for 15 years there had been nothing but coffee. There were some abandoned coffee farms, but nothing but coffee and abandoned coffee farms. What's happening now is that the government is subsidizing the construction of greenhouses for bell peppers and tomatoes, and so there's quite a bit of greenhouse growing. Issues with greenhouse growing are that they use a lot of chemicals. Okay, they can get an extra half turn or an extra, a half more yield every year with stimulants. Okay, it's like I call them steroids, and people are starting to get sick from that. So,
can you explain why I think Starbucks coffee is stronger and richer? I'm not a coffee expert. I drink it every day, but
sure.
It's so strong I don't like it. But
Okay.
it's that $1.80 a pound crap.
Okay,
that you're talking about.
The brilliance of Starbucks, and there is quite a bit of brilliance. I speak, I should probably be a little bit more fair when I talk about Starbucks because they do a lot of really good things. Okay, but from my perspective, their brilliance at today in 2018 is their consistency. Okay, it always tastes the same. You can be in Berlin one day and Beijing the next, and in Evanston or Skokie the third day. It will always taste the way it tasted the last time you had it. Why? Well, it's the way they roast the coffee. All right. When you roast coffee, it's these chemical changes that take place. And remember, I mentioned as you go up deeper in roast, things become to taste more familiar. Okay, so the brilliance is also the weakness because it always tastes the same. You don't get to taste any other things that might be happening in coffee. They go in. When you roast coffee, the roasting coffee is the application of heat, the intensity, and the duration. That's all it is, okay? And so if you roast at high temperatures quickly, you're going to start to burn the coffee, and that's what they do. That's what their model is. What Starbucks has done, interestingly, and I have not seen any of their stores, but they've opened up something called Reserva stores, where previously Starbucks roasted on a regional basis. So they would have one plant in the Midwest that they were roasting all their coffee at, and they would truck it to all the states here in the Midwest. Okay, same in Northwest, same in the East Coast, and but Starbucks set a plateau in the coffee world, okay? And I mean, they set a major plateau. They got left at that plateau. Specialty coffee, okay? Pete's was the first of the specialty coffee places, but then there are a lot that have gone past. Pete's has almost been stabilized at that plateau level also, okay? There are a lot of the small shops. There's a place, the hell's the name of the place? Reprise Coffee. I was in Reprise Coffee. You were asking about coffee places where you go to taste coffee. I like their coffees. They're either in Winnetka or Wilmette. I don't know. But I'm going to taste their coffees. These are the third wave, what we call third wave shops, okay? And they're doing a lot more things. But you come back to Starbucks, and they've got to have that consistency. They roast it fast, they roast it hot, it tastes the same, and they verge on bitter, okay? The last major chemical thing that takes place in the caramelization, all right, caramelization, it's called the Maillard effect, and that's the biggest thing in roasting, the Maillard effect. Okay, what is it? You release the sugars, okay, from the heat. All of a sudden, it goes from smelling like horse feed to a bakery, okay, because it's got all this sweetness. And then those sugars, more heat, more time, and those sugars begin to change colors, okay. Well, what that does in caramelization is a change of colors, but it's also going from sweet at one end to bitter at the other end. So the roaster needs to find the right combinations of sweetness, of brightness, or bitterness, okay? And the last major thing that happens is the oils become released, okay? When the oils are released in the machine, okay, they start to burn. You've got like 10 seconds to get them out before they burn. When you go into a Starbucks and you see a slick-looking coffee, a wet-looking coffee, pretty good chance it's going to taste bitter, okay? Particularly if it's a Central or South American coffee. If it's a Sumatran, Indonesian coffee, it might taste a little, maybe not so bitter, but it's about the way they roast it.
Years ago, could you explain the popularity of Dunkin' coffee? Was it a marketing thing, or
yeah,
the taste was very good?
Yeah, Dunkin' came in with light roasted coffees. I don't know that much about Dunkin'. If you look at it, Starbucks set the mark, but then you got McDonald's coming in, you got Dunkin' coming in, you got Tim Hortons, you got who else? There's somebody else real big like that, and they're in price 20-25% less. Quality wise, I don't think there's much difference. Actually, from my perspective, the Mech Cafe size of a McDonald's actually has pretty good coffee, and it's a lot less expensive than Starbucks.
Could you tell us what would happen here?
Okay, thank you.
What would happen if you were to simply grind a coffee bean and not have roasted it?
I'm not sure you could grind it, because what happens during the roasting process is it becomes brittle. It takes a lot of the moisture out. You lose, I mean, I don't know if you wouldn't get much taste from it. There's I don't think I can speak to that with any kind of.
I've often wondered how anyone discovered that you have to roast it to make the flavor.
Okay.
And so I often wondered whether or not you could just grind the coffee bean.
No, there's a terrible story of the legend of how coffee was first discovered, okay? And
Let's hear it.
Oh God, okay. All right. Ethiopia in the year 800, Kaldi, okay, a goat herder is tending to his goats, and he notices after a couple of days that the goats are hyperactive, they're jumping around, and he wants to know why, so he follows them out, and he sees them eating the red coffee cherries off of the trees. And he thinks about it, and he says, well, if it works for them, maybe it'll work for me, so he tries them, and sure enough, he eats some cherries, he gets this hyperactive. Okay, so Kaldi lives in a monastery, okay, and he has an idea. He says, you know what, if I can introduce these coffee cherries and this energy to the monks in the monastery, they'll have extra energy, they can pray longer, they can study harder. I'm going to do a community service. So he grabs a basket full of them, he takes them to the monastery, he starts to explain his idea, and the head guy says, not going to happen. He grabs a basket of cherries and throws them into an open fire, and they begin to roast, and the aromas entice them into. It's a story that actually lives. I don't know, but that's, yeah.
Okay.
Could you clarify about the formaldehyde in the decaf coffee? Is it remnants afterwards? Is it completely gone, the
It's
formaldehyde?
completely gone. It's completely. People have been doing this for hundreds of years. Hundreds of years, at least 100 years, yeah, without any. It just sounds worse. We always say it because it sounds gross. I don't think there's much issue with it.
So what's the answer?
Is it gone?
Yeah,
I believe so.
okay,
Okay.
thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I have a question too. Have you been able to find a group of people you associate with on a social to
Absolutely.
make yourselves happy there?
Yeah.
And how about security?
Okay. We live in basically an expat community. All right. So in the greater village area, there are maybe 25,000 people, and perhaps 10% of them are North Americans, some Europeans, but yeah. So, and when you go to an expat community, people always come with the same baggage, if you will. They've left their friends, they've left their families, so they're very social. So that's, there are too many. But okay. In terms of security, I would say we're pretty comfortable with it. When we first came there were no crime. People never locked their doors. No crime at all. Now there are crimes of opportunity, which means if you leave your door open and a computer on or a camera on your car seat, somebody's going to take it. But that's every place you go. In terms of physical crime, no, we feel pretty secure.
As you tell about the story about how coffee got first roasted, I've heard a story, and I don't drink coffee, okay? But supposedly there's an animal that eats the beans and poops them out, and it's the best tasting coffee in the world.
Now, the best tasting part isn't probably true.
I'm sorry, what?
That's probably not true, the best tasting part. But it's the civet cat in Indonesia. And you guys remember the movie The Bucket List with Morgan Freeman and Jack Nicholson? One of their desires was to taste the cat poop coffee. The issues that happened with that was a natural process. And when it was a natural process, from my perspective, it was pretty interesting. But again, people get greedy, and now they cage the animals. So they cage and force feed the cat. They've done it with monkeys and with birds. It's pretty gross, actually, what's going on there. Done now primarily in the Philippines and in parts of Indonesia. The real thing, they've got to process the coffee, so the digestive tract is as good a place as any, I guess.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you guys. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Great.